Welcome back to our channel. Ernest Borgnine didn't say anything about the co-star who made his life miserable for 60 years. Startling information has now surfaced on the actual events on set, including violent outbursts, sequences that were ruined, and the coffee flinging incident that resulted in second-degree burns. The most shocking discovery, however, was not merely a professional one. It was really intimate. The truth of Hollywood's most perilous quarrel is finally revealed today. Ernest Borgnine's journey to Hollywood was far from prearranged. He was born Hermes Efron Borgnino in 1917 in Hamden, Connecticut, the son of Italian immigrants who came to the United States in search of a better life. However, his life took an unforeseen turn before he could even begin to remember where he was born. His parents were no longer together. He spent the next 5 years in Italy, where he was surrounded by a whole new world, thanks to his mother. Living in Carpi, close to Modena, he spoke only Italian and assimilated into the local way of life as though he had been born there. Then, in 1923, everything was different. The family moved back to the United States after his parents made amends. This was more than just a homecoming move. It was a matter of beginning again. The name Camillo was changed to Charles by his father. To seem more American and blend in, the family name was abbreviated from Borgnino to Borgnine. This identity change for young Ernest was only the first of many changes that would shape his future. Born in New Haven, Connecticut, Borgnine had no desire to pursue a career in acting. The child who dreamed of Hollywood wasn't him. Or sneaking into movie theaters to see movies. He was concentrating on athletics since he liked the competitiveness and physicality. Drama and theater were not mentioned in his high school yearbook. By that time, there was no indication that he would ever appear before a camera. The U.S. Navy was the first in line for fate's other plan. He enlisted right out of high school in 1935. For a period of 6 years, he served aboard the USS Lamberton. He was prepared to move on by 1941 and was honorably discharged. However, Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan only 2 months later. He could not simply see his nation go to war. The USS Sylph, a patrol vessel entrusted with protecting the Atlantic coast, was the ship he rejoined in January 1942. War altered him. It made him tough. His portrayal of military characters on cinema would subsequently be influenced by the discipline and profound grasp of camaraderie he gained from it. Upon his release in 1945, he had achieved several military awards and attained the rank of gunner's mate first class. He nearly became a career member of the Navy. For another 10 years, he gave re-enlistment significant thought. Hollywood wouldn't have known his name if he had. However, his mother's statement lingered with him. He should attempt acting, she advised, because he had a strong personality. It was just one recommendation that made all the difference. Acting felt like an odd decision at first. He was inexperienced, unconnected, and unsure of where to begin. However, that didn't deter him. In Hartford, he enrolled at the Randall School of Drama. Afterward, he traveled to Virginia and became a member of the Barter Theater. It was not a dazzling beginning. During the Great Depression, a straightforward but unique concept led to the founding of the Barter Theater. Food could be exchanged for tickets. As a result, actors frequently received vegetable payments rather than cash. Borgnine was indifferent. He played every role he could find and performed all night long. He worked behind the scenes, repairing costumes and even cleaning bathrooms while he wasn't on stage. He once had to chase a live chicken across the stage during a performance. The crowd erupted in laughter and screams as the bird flew into the air and began clapping madly. Although it was chaotic, he learned a valuable lesson. He gained skills in improvising, interacting with the audience, and transforming a catastrophe into a show. He collaborated with upcoming celebrities like Gregory Peck as well. Observing and learning alongside Patricia Neal. And then it was his moment. In Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie, he was cast. He believed himself to be awful. There was disagreement among the audience. Everyone's attention was quickly drawn to the successful performance. He made it to Broadway by 1949. In the long-running drama Harvey, he made his acting debut with James Stewart, a Hollywood icon. But it hadn't been simple to get there. The casting directors had no idea how to handle him. His visage was too funny for drama, too cruel for comedy. Harvey showed that no one could really figure out where he fit in. Borgnine, who played a male nurse, figured out his role on stage by observing Stewart's every action. He also kept a diary in which he recorded his observations, observed Stewart's delivery of lines, and gained first-hand knowledge of the profession. He got the solidity he needed from the 1,775 performances of the play. And then there was television. He played a villain in the low-budget sci-fi series Captain Video and his Video Rangers in 1951, which marked his TV debut. He was noticed even though it wasn't a prestigious one. After recognizing his potential, Columbia Pictures offered him a little role in the Eaton Falls Whistle. It was a first step, but it wasn't much. From Here to Eternity, released in 1953, was his breakthrough motion picture role. He had served 10 years in the U.S. Navy prior to Hollywood. Nothing could have prepared him for the character of Sergeant Fatso Judson, but that experience made him a natural fit for military roles. The actual Borgnine, who was renowned for his gentleness, was very different from the vicious and sadistic figure. In the film's most unsettling sequence, Judson used a nightstick to beat Frank Sinatra's character, Angelo Maggio, to death. It was difficult to watch, frightening, and terrible. Even Sinatra had questioned Borgnine's capacity to portray such a threatening character, but that uncertainty vanished as soon as the movie began. Borgnine gave the role his all attention. It took him days to get into the proper frame of mind. A completely different person emerged. Sinatra refused to speak with him off-camera for weeks because of how convincing his portrayal was. Crew members shunned him, too. Not only his co-stars were impacted by the role's intensity. He carried it with him long after the filming was over. Months of nightmares about the sight plagued him, he subsequently acknowledged. The audience's response was even more intense. He received death threats from certain people who were so troubled by his performance. Incapable of distinguishing the actor from the role. He suffered because of the part, but he also became famous as a result. Hollywood was astonished once more by him 2 years later. It was not a villain he was portraying this time. He portrayed a typical butcher searching for love in Marty. Compared to Fatso Judson, it was the total opposite. The movie was risky in and of itself. On a meager $343,000 budget, it was produced. In a film that would win Best Picture, it was an unprecedented sum. However, no one anticipated Marty's ability to connect with audiences. In 1955, Borgnine took home the Best Actor Oscar. One of the oldest actors to win for a prominent first role was 38 years old. He defeated Hollywood heavyweights like Spencer Tracy and James Dean, which was even more unexpected. His acceptance speech was straightforward. He praised his mother for supporting his ambition to be an actor, but in reality, he hardly ever got the part in the first place. At first, director Delbert Mann wanted Rod Steiger, who had portrayed Marty on television. Initially, Borgnine was not even taken into account. A fortuitous meeting at a party in Hollywood changed that. Because of his appeal, the producers agreed to give him a screen test. Mann remarked afterwards that Ernest Borgnine didn't act Marty since his portrayal was so natural. His name was Marty. His career was altered by that role. It revolutionized the film industry by demonstrating that audiences could be won over without major stars or lavish resources. Borgnine never allowed himself to be confined to a single role. At the age of 50, he portrayed General Wardens in the culturally iconic movie The Dirty Dozen in 1967. He demanded to perform all of his own stunts, including a risky jump from a moving train. His endurance astonished Charles Bronson and Lee Marvin, two of his younger co-stars. 2 years later, in one of the bloodiest westerns ever produced, The Wild Bunch, he once again astounded viewers. His portrayal of Dutch Angstrom was brutal but oddly endearing. One scene was more notable than the others. He laughed crazily while shooting down dozens of men. For years, the moment plagued him. Ernest Borgnine's path to popularity on television, meantime, was not without its twists. It was McHale's Navy that gave him his big television break. During the 4 seasons of the show, he became well known. Borgnine as Lieutenant Commander Quentin McHale, a relaxed officer in charge of an oddball crew. It was a far cry from the dramatic roles he had previously portrayed. Most individuals were unaware that actual experience influenced his performance. In World War II, he had spent years aboard the USS Sylph while serving in the Navy. Even at its most ridiculous, he exuded a natural confidence in the character because of that. McHale's Navy, however, was more than just jokes and quick success. A tragic accident occurred on the set of Borgnine during the 2nd season. A premature explosion from a pyrotechnic device burned his hands and face. While he healed, filming had to halt for 3 weeks. He was more committed than ever when he returned. He received an Emmy nomination for the part that same year. The program even unexpectedly impacted actual military operations. In 1965, a confidential memo disclosed that the U.S. The writers for the show had conferred with Navy. McHale's innovative approach to problem solving was seen by some officials as having practical applications. The outcome was a set of naval training exercises called Operation McHale, which was influenced by the program. Although specifics of those exercises remain classified, it seems inconceivable that a sitcom could have affected military strategy. Unexpected changes continued occurring in Borgnine's television career. Airwolf, a fast-paced action series about a future helicopter, featured him as Dominic Santini in 1984. He refused to slow down, even though he was 67 years old at the time. He performed many of his own stunts as well. In 1985, he almost lost his life because of that choice. A helicopter lost control while shooting and landed a few feet away from his position. He was spared by his fast responses and left with only minor wounds. He then played a part that exposed him to a whole new generation. This is the SpongeBob SquarePants Mermaid Man. His grandson, a major show fan, was the catalyst for it all. He should be on it, the boy kept reminding him. Borgnine brought this up at a charity function one evening in 1998. There, a Nickelodeon producer requested him to read a couple lines immediately. Using only a napkin as a screenplay, he gave the performance that won him the position. Over the course of 13 years, Mermaid Man made 17 appearances and became a fan favorite. In the language of the character, the show's authors even included subtle references to Borgnine's actual Navy service. In 2012, 2 weeks prior to his death, he recorded his last song. He was one of the oldest voice performers still in the business at the time, aged 95. In the beginning, Borgnine, who went on to become a TV legend, had no interest in television. He received an offer to play the lead in The Real McCoys in 1956, right after winning the Oscar for Marty. TV is a fad, he told reporters, declining the offer. It will never endure. TV was considered a step down by most cinema stars at the time. That attitude shifted in 1961. He encountered a small child who was suffering from a fatal illness at a charity function. In the hospital, the boy told him he enjoyed watching his movies. It was a blow to Borgnine. He understood that watching television meant more than just amusement. It might connect with viewers in a manner that films couldn't. The Real McCoys was already popular with Walter Brennan in the starring role when he made the decision to pursue a career in television. That rejection taught Borgnine a valuable lesson. A few months later, McHale's Navy appeared, and he seized the chance. He acknowledged that he was mistaken about television years later. I was foolish to believe that television was beneath me, he stated in an interview. It has nothing to do with screen size. It's about the audience's heart size. Throughout his life, Ernest Borgnine gave many memorable performances, but his romantic life was as spectacular. He had 5 marriages in a span of 95 years. Heartbreak, scandal, and enduring devotion were the outcomes of some marriages. Before he became well known, he was married to Rhoda Kemmons. In 1949, they got married, and in 1952, they had a daughter named Nancy. Together, they created a life for over 10 years. However, Hollywood made all the difference. Borgnine's marriage ended as his profession flourished. But it was over by 1958. Katie Jurado, a Mexican actress who was renowned for her fiery presence both on and off screen, marked the beginning of the next phase of his romantic life. Despite their 1959 marriage, they had a very tense relationship. They made news for their battles. And public arguments frequently resulted from their passion. By 1963, they were fed up. An additional lesson was learnt when a marriage terminated. The shortest and most notorious of them all followed. Ethel Merman, a Broadway legend, married Borgnine in 1964. Just over a month passed during their whole relationship. Initially, it resembled a fantasy tale from Hollywood. Following their June wedding, they traveled to Japan for their honeymoon. But the journey ended in calamity rather than romance. Everywhere Borgnine went, they were swarmed by fans. Merman, accustomed to the limelight, was disregarded. Day after day, the strain increased. It detonated in Tokyo. A fierce dispute was later heard reverberating through the hotel hallways, according to witnesses. By the time the journey was over, Merman had had enough. A diamond and pearl ring was thrown into a koi pond by her in a fit of wrath. She declared, "I do," and filed for divorce less than 5 weeks later. Merman didn't bring up the marriage ever again. Rather, her silence spoke for itself. She wrote and published her autobiography in 1978. There was a chapter called My Marriage to Ernest Borgnine. In anticipation of a story, readers turned the page. They discovered only a blank page instead. It was a statement that, in a single phrase, stated everything. Later, Borgnine acknowledged how painful it was. According to his interview, I thought that blank page said more to me than anything she could have written. I will never forget the slap in the face. Following that catastrophe, Borgnine wed Donna Rancourt in 1965. They had 3 kids, Diana, Christopher, and Sharon. Compared to the others, this marriage lasted longer. However, that ended in divorce as well by 1972. Eventually, he discovered the one. Borgnine met Tove Trains, a Norwegian businesswoman, during a party in Las Vegas in 1972. Although she was initially hesitant due to her knowledge of his reputation, Borgnine's charisma eventually won her over. He experienced true stability for the first time when they were married in 1973. Tove wasn't merely his spouse. She was, in every sense, his partner. She established a prosperous beauty company, and Borgnine became her staunchest ally. His appearance in her advertisements even led him to quip that he was the world's oldest living Avon lady. Their love lasted almost 40 years, longer than all of his prior marriages put together. Throughout his last years, Borgnine frequently attributed his perseverance to Tove. I'm 95 years old, and I'm still going strong, he stated in his final interview, which was conducted a few weeks before he passed away. My affection for Tove is probably the reason. He went away on July 8, 2012, with her holding his hand. Finally, after years of looking, he had discovered a lasting love. In the meantime, both Shelley Winters and Ernest Borgnine were well-known figures with robust personalities. It meant that their time together on the Poseidon voyage was anything from straightforward. After their ship capsized, a group of passengers fought for their lives in the disaster movie from 1972. Winters was his resolute wife, and Borgnine was a strong detective. Although they gave powerful performances, there was a lot of stress in their working relationship behind the scenes. Winters was renowned for her strict methods. She frequently advocated for revisions to the screenplay since she felt that her characters should be completely understood. She once showed up on set with a 20-page dossier detailing the past of her character. To suit her vision, she insisted on revising lines. In the midst of the screenwriter's resistance, Borgnine was caught. Winters wanted to be in charge of every detail, which he later acknowledged made working with her draining. The largest obstacle was encountered during a challenging underwater sequence. The production crew was concerned about Winters' safety, but she insisted on performing her own stunts. She wanted to demonstrate that, at 51, she was still able to swim like a champion. What was to have been a brief shoot turned into a torturous 14-hour day. The director was not satisfied until the scene had been filmed 65 times. Even Borgnine was annoyed by the lengthy hours. Yet he maintained his professionalism. He later referred to it as one of his most difficult workdays. In spite of the difficulties, Winters' performance was remarkable. When she was nominated for an Academy Award, her hard work paid off. Borgnine eventually acknowledged that Winters' intuition was frequently correct, despite his frustration. He characterized her years after the movie as a force of nature, challenging and erratic, but clearly gifted. Working with her was a privilege and a challenge, in his opinion. Their on-set conflicts ultimately served to heighten the drama of their performances. Furthermore, Spencer Tracy had long been revered by Ernest Borgnine. However, collaborating with him on Bad Day at Black Rock in 1955 was a completely different experience. It was about intimidating, not simply showing. Temperatures far above 100 degrees. Borgnine, however, was hardly aware. He worried too much about being on screen alongside one of Hollywood's best actors. At the age of 54, Tracy had won 2 Academy Awards and was renowned for his straightforward acting style. 37 years old Borgnine remained proving himself. Their disparity in experience pervaded every moment they spent together. Tracy was able to make his co-stars unsteady. He was not merely a line memorizer. With such assurance, he improvised, altered, and performed them that it was hard to distinguish between what was and wasn't scripted. It was unfamiliar to Borgnine. During a stressful scene one day, Tracy said something unexpected. That precise take made it into the final edit, and Borgnine froze. The moment was genuine. John Sturges, the director, enjoyed using long, continuous takes. Not a problem for an actor like Tracy. The experience was a nightmare for someone like Borgnine. In a crucial sequence on August 17, he fumbled his lines 7 times in a row. Tracy was getting more and more frustrated with every error. Borgnine was getting smaller every second. Their performances were impacted by their tension. Borgnine portrayed a sour-tempered gangster named Coley Trimble. Tracy portrayed John J. McCready, a man who refused to give up. While their scenes together were powerful, the fight scene in the town's diner was far more so. One of the most memorable scenes in the movie, which was shot on August 23, was this fight. Playing a veteran of a one-armed war who had to use sheer talent to defeat Borgnine's character. Borgnine was actually larger. He was about 210 pounds in weight and 5 feet 9 inches tall. At 5 feet 10 inches, Tracy was a little taller, but she weighed only 160 pounds. The scenario was made much more dramatic by their physical difference. It took 14 tries before they got it correctly. The situation became too real. Inadvertently, Borgnine punched Tracy in the jaw. The set fell silent. Tracy took a moment to think, then dismissed it as if nothing had occurred. Borgnine was already tense, and now he was considerably more so. He was always making mistakes. The pressure increased further. Then came the moment that Borgnine would remember for years. Tracy said it while looking down at him. "You're not only wrong, you're wrong at the top of your voice." Something about the way he said it felt personal, like he wasn't just talking to the character, but to Borgnine himself. The final part of the fight involved Tracy flipping Borgnine onto a table using a single-arm judo throw. No stunt doubles, just 2 exhausted actors giving everything they had. They filmed the last take at exactly 4:17 p.m. The frustration, the sweat, the exhaustion, it all made the scene feel raw and real. Despite everything, that fight changed things between them. Tracy, who had spent most of the shoot keeping Borgnine on edge, suddenly had a new kind of respect for him. Not long after, he recommended Borgnine for Marty, 1955, the role that won him an Oscar. Then, Ernest Borgnine signed on to Johnny Guitar in 1954, expecting a typical film shoot. Instead, he found himself in the middle of one of Hollywood's most explosive feuds. Joan Crawford and Mercedes McCambridge didn't just dislike each other, they were at war. The trouble started when Crawford discovered that McCambridge's husband, Fletcher Markle, had once been involved with her. That bit of history was enough to set her off. From that moment on, she made McCambridge's life miserable. One day, Borgnine watched as Crawford stormed onto the set, grabbed McCambridge's costumes, and tossed them onto the highway. The crew had to rush to gather them before they were lost to the Arizona desert. Borgnine tried to focus on his work, but the tension made that nearly impossible. Crawford and McCambridge refused to be in the same room. Their scenes had to be filmed separately, forcing director Nicholas Ray to stitch everything together later. That was frustrating enough, but things got even worse. On September 3, during a particularly heated moment, Crawford and McCambridge lost control. They went from shouting to swinging. Borgnine and co-star Sterling Hayden had to jump in and pull them apart. It was chaos. Later, Borgnine called it the most unprofessional behavior he had ever seen. Despite all of this, Crawford never turned on Borgnine. He actually got along with her, but he saw enough to know that her temper had no limits. One day, after a bad take, she grabbed a cup of hot coffee and threw it at a young production assistant. The poor guy suffered second-degree burns. Borgnine never forgot that moment. In an interview years later, he said, "Joan was like a ticking time bomb. You never knew what would set her off." Then there was the time he accidentally walked in on her screaming at a costume designer. Her voice was sharp. Her eyes were wild. Borgnine didn't say a word. He just backed out of the room before she could turn her anger on him. Crawford wasn't all fury though. On the last day of filming, she surprised the crew with personalized bottles of Pepsi. Her husband was the CEO of Pepsi-Cola, and this was her way of showing gratitude. But even that small kindness couldn't erase the tension. Before she left, she had one final showdown with McCambridge. She warned her, loud enough for everyone to hear, that she would ruin her career. Years later, Borgnine looked back on the experience with a mix of awe and disbelief. Working with Joan was like walking on eggshells while juggling dynamite. He said, "She was brilliant, but boy, was she scary."